Let's talk about the new Autopsy record. Comes out this Friday, October 27th. It is their ninth studio album, Ashes, Organs, Blood, and Crypts. Out on Peaceville Records. And I feel like this is kind of flying under the radar this year in terms of releases, which there's been a lot of stuff coming out, especially now since it's coming towards the end of the year. More stuff is coming out, I feel like, weekly at this point. Um, but the band has been around for 36 years, so I don't think I need to do any sort of introduction. If you're into death metal, you know who Autopsy are. You probably have heard at least several of their albums. And yeah, just to be 100% transparent, they are probably my number three, two, one. It goes back and forth. Just one of my all-time favorite death metal bands. I still listen to them all the time. I've generally just at this point they could release albums until they're 90 years old and it wouldn't matter what they sounded like. I probably would still buy them just because I'm a huge fan of the band. But I don't think that's gonna happen. Settle down. But this album is really good, and I know some people are probably gonna be like, "Well, that's a shocker. Melanie likes it." But here's the thing: I didn't really talk about Morbidity Triumphant last year. Now, did I? I may have shown off the record because I got it. Obviously, I got it, but I didn't really talk much about it. I liked that album, but I don't remember the last time I've listened to it, with the exception of the last couple of days, to try and do an album comparison between that and this new one. That last album didn't really like scratch the itch for me in terms of what I would want to listen to for death metal. I think I might have spun it like 3 times, and it's been sitting on my shelf ever since. It wasn't bad per se, but there were things about it that I wasn't like fully committed to listening to. I think just overall the production kind of bothered me a tiny bit. They definitely had a copy paste mentality from some their past several albums as well. I mean, there were some different changes and variances in sound with it, with the addition of Greg Wilkinson, who is now in the band. But that album just didn't like do it for me, and it's not a bad album. I do think it's going to be one of the more underrated albums in their discography. I mean, they're on their ninth album right now, and I always have said that Autopsy is one of those bands that has a solid discography, not a single bad album in their discography. Just I've always liked some more than others, and I think that goes along with the same case as the other legendary death metal bands like Cannibal Corpse and Incantation, who also released albums this year. So yeah, Morbidity Triumphant, probably my one of my least favorite Autopsy albums in a discography. Like again, not a bad album, just not one that really clicked with me as fast as this one has. This one, in my opinion, again, keep that in mind. This is my opinion, is a step way above Morbidity Triumphant. This production sounds so much better. It seems like they've got a chemistry here that is working for them, while still being Autopsy and not losing that Autopsy sound by any means, but also adding an additional sound that I didn't think I needed in their music, but it's there. And that is definitely the punkier sound that you get on this album. So right out the gate, the first song, Rapid Funeral, it's a very in-your-face punky sounding album. And I really like it. I'm not a huge punk metal fan. I don't ever listen to it. I don't really know much about the genre. I know, the legendary bands that everybody knows, but for the most part, it's not something I listen to at all. But I do like how it's littered throughout this whole entire album. I think it adds a layer to the music that is really enjoyable, and it's fun, and it's easy to digest, and something that's easy to listen to over and over again. And that's generally what I like in my death metal. There are those few exceptions where they're very heavy, suffocating albums, or the ones that are really technical and noodly and like make you have to think. I do like those, but in terms of the death metal that I want to listen to on a daily basis, this is definitely one of those records that will now be in heavy rotation, with how just overall fun, and fast and aggressive and riffage. There's no lack of riffs on this album whatsoever. Chris's vocals are spectacular as always. I prefer them on this album compared to Morbidity Triumphant. They're a little bit more raspier, shrill, and even louder almost. Like his vocals sound a little bit muffled on the last album, and they really stand out. The bass, of course, the bass is just juicy and great, and Greg adds that layer to the band that I think fits perfectly, especially on this album. And it's just so many amazing bass lines. Just really, it's so good. That's probably one of my favorite things about this album. And then, of course, you've got the maniacal, amazing drumming. All those elements are there on this album. The song, I'm going to break out a couple songs that I really enjoyed on here. I will go off and talk about my overall favorite song on the album is the last song called Coagulation. It's a doomy song. There's a lot of doom on this album that has not gone away. I think there's often been times where Autopsy's been called like the death metal Black Sabbath, and I definitely think that is a valid point. You get a lot of that element in here, and there are some guitar riffs and just overall guitar doomy styles on here that I continuously think like this is like kind of like the Geezer Butler, Tony Iommi like doomy sound in terms of that. But Coagulation is my favorite song on this album. It's the final song, which is interesting. But it's got a wailing guitar line, just a really like jamming riffage on here. It's got that doomy element to it, and there's this awesome guitar solo on it that really just is great. Sounds awesome. But the one thing I like about the song is that it goes kind of like back and forth. Like the vocals will go and it'll be like a slower vocal style, and then it'll come back and it'll be like a fast guitar riff back and forth. Like it's almost like they're doing like a battle. It feels like the vocals and then the guitars. So that was the element of the song that I really enjoyed. I've listened to that song 4 times in a row because I just was really into it when I first heard it. So it's a great song. The album title track, Ashes, Organs, Bloods, and Crypts, is another spectacular song that ended up being one of my favorite songs on here as well. It's got an awesome opening guitar riff. It's got that fuzzy doomage riffage in there. It's just a really fun, really good song. I'm going to say fun a lot, which is going to be weird because this is a death metal album. Another one that was my favorite track on here was Toxic Death Fuck. This is definitely a very punky song. It's one of the shorter songs on the album. It's only 2 minutes and 41 seconds. But it's aggressive in your face, and it just is, they do it well. Like death punk. I don't even know if that's a thing, but they do it really well. It's a fun song. I was really into it. Imagining them playing that live, that's going to be fun. I 100% hope that they do a headlining tour where they play most of these songs, because it'll be a really good show in terms of just the aggression and this fast pace that they add into these songs, along with the slower here and there doomy elements that they've always had. Yeah. I think the single Throat Saw is great. That's what's came out when they announced the album. That's also another really good song. But I don't think it's the best song on the album whatsoever, but it did give a good highlight into what you were going to be getting yourself into, for sure. The other one that I wanted to call out, Bones to the Wolves. Again, another great opening guitar riff. I just love the continued doom elements that have been littered in here, and Chris's shrill vocal style and screaming in this song is so good. That's what really, really did it for me for this song, especially this whole album. Like, his vocals are just, they're always phenomenal, but for whatever reason, I really like the, like, almost like crisper, shrill, screeching, squealing. I don't even know the right, like, word, shrill, I guess, of how he does on here. A little bit more of that, less of the more, like lower growly mumble that he kind of does on other albums. Like, that's definitely there from time to time, but he really, really uses that scream on this album, let me tell you. Lobotomizing Gods is another great song. Okay, so generally, pretty much, there's not a single song on here that I don't like. Just gonna call that out. But that was another one I wanted to call out. It's got a little bit more of that suffocating feel to it. Definitely a little bit more of a doomier song, that's for sure. The tempo goes back and forth on this track, from the slow and then the fast, and then also the like really squirrely riffs. It's a fantastic song. Overall, the production sounds better on this album. It's less muddy than Morbidity Triumphant was. And I think, in my honest opinion, this is probably going to be one of my, at least top five Autopsy albums. I am a huge fan of some of their later works in their discography. I did a discography ranking a long time ago, and I've always said, Severed Survival, Mental Funeral, obviously the classics, the legendary albums that everybody loves, and obviously some of my all-time favorite death metal albums. But I've always been a fan of Tourniquets, Hacksaws, and Graves. I thought that was a fantastic album that came out in 2014. I really, really liked it. Macabre Eternal is another one that I've always been a huge fan of, and I really liked the Headless Ritual. Like these later Autopsy albums are good, and they're consistent, and they're not junk whatsoever. The band still is pumping out great music after 36 years. They still have a chemistry that is working, and they're still releasing quality death metal. And I can't honestly say, like, with the current death metal scene that we're in right now, with how it's been oversaturated, I'll be honest with you, since probably 2018 up until now, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. There's all these new bands coming out and these new labels popping up, and these old school death metal revivals is really saturated. And there's bands that are finding success, and they're flying now, like 200 Stab Wounds, Frozen Soul, those types of bands, and they're stamping a new modern death metal sound in there. And for bands like Autopsy, Incantation, Cannibal Corpse, and Suffocation's coming out with an album, I think, next month or in December, like, they're continuously pumping out quality, good death metal that I would prefer to listen to over some of these newer ones that I really, really enjoy, and I promote all the time on here, and I go see them live, and I buy all their stuff, but at the end of the day, it's the old guys that are winning this battle. If it's not even a battle, I wouldn't even call it that. I mean, some people might, but like, they're still releasing these phenomenal records, and there's just not an exception. This is a really good album. They are definitely still copy pasting the Autopsy sound and elements into there, while still also kind of expanding too, and changing it up a little bit here and there. Not a single song on here sounds pretty much the same. Every single song stands out from each other. And they have a lot of really great moments on here that just really make you think, like, yeah, and like you just like kind of bang your head and think, like, this is one of the greatest death metal bands ever, and they're still doing it to this day. So that is my thoughts on it. I would be curious to know what everybody thinks when this comes out on Friday. I know that pre-orders are shipping now. Mine's on the way, so I'm excited to get it. This was kind of one of those under the radar albums that I knew was coming, I was excited about, but there's been so much other stuff that I've been listening to and getting involved with in terms of new music, that now that it's finally here, I'm happy, and I'm really happy that it's good, and this is going to be one of my favorite albums this year. And like I said, it'll be heavy in rotation probably for a while now, similar to their other albums that they've put out over the 36 years that they've been in existence. So even their EPs, like some of their EPs are great. Like Puncturing the Grotesque was a really good EP. Skull Grinder was a really good EP. So yeah, it's Autopsy. I just love them. So that's all I have today, and I will see you guys in the next one.